Right. Um, I think we should make a start. So welcome, welcome colleagues for this really important event on how universities can best address the climate and nature crises. My name is Jan Pomowski. I'm Secretary General of the Guild, and I'm delighted to welcome you here. In the background, I'm here in our office in Brussels, but in the background you can see an image of the Delta Center at the University of Tartu. It's a building that was created fairly recently, which really brings together startups, entrepreneurs, the local community, but also students and researchers, of course, to work together to really address the digital transformation, but of course also in a climate-friendly way. And that brings me to, in a sense, the core issue of today's webinar, because when the Guild started to really prepare this insight paper that we're introducing today, we were encouraged really to engage with the Green Deal by the Timmermans cabinet and with other leading colleagues from the Commission, because it was felt by us as well that really universities need to be right in the space of the Green Deal. But that was 2022. Now we're 2025, and it seems that very few people in public debate are really still talking about the Green Deal. It doesn't seem to be an issue, a very prominent issue in national politics anymore. It doesn't seem to be as prominent in the European Union as it used to be, because other things have taken over. And yet it seemed, as we prepared the insight paper for publication, it seemed to us that it was precisely important to really focus on the climate and nature crises, because these don't go away. Indeed, all the evidence points to the fact that these get more acute in our local communities, in our countries, but also around the world in different manifestations. And that, it seemed to us, made it all the more important that universities are in this space. So just before we go into the discussion, let me just raise a few, just a few housekeeping points. So please use the question and answers panel for questions you might like to address to the panel, but also use the chat function. If you have any thoughts, if you have any ideas from your own practice, we have a very long list of attendees and of registrations, which is wonderful to see. We know that the audience is really composed to a significant extent of practitioners from a whole range of universities right across Europe, but also including Africa, both in research and in teaching. So if you have any questions, any thoughts from your own practice, we'd love to hear from those also in the chat, and that will be supported by members of our team here in Brussels, but also from our sustainability working group. So, I should say that the webinar is recorded on our, and we will it will go on our YouTube channel after this event. But also, we are introducing our insight paper, and that will be released right after this webinar today at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Brussels time. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to move to the program, and I would like to start with Jamie Toney. Jamie is a professor of environmental and climate science at the University of Glasgow. Jamie is an environmental and climate scientist. She's the director of the Centre for Sustainable Solutions. And she is the principal investigator of the Gallon project, and I hope that we'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute. So Jamie has been a really important part of the working group that has been behind the paper that we will publish today, and she's coming on now to introduce the paper in its key arguments. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Jan. Let me just share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see that now. So greetings, everybody, and thank you for that kind introduction. Since its inaugural meeting, as John had said, in September of 2022, the Sustainability Working Group has been meeting to understand the unique role universities can play in engaging citizens and policymakers with the climate and nature crises. In particular, it's important that this is done in a way that reveals the complex set of interactions they have with the wider set of urgent societal needs. So today, I'm presenting on behalf of the Guild's Sustainability Working Group and the University Vice President's members who have contributed to the insight paper that will be launched later today. So before getting into the paper itself, I'll set the scene with the current context of this work. I'll introduce the key themes emerging from the insight paper and do a deeper dive into education and research and innovation. I'll give examples by way of case studies on how university education and research can contribute to holistic solutions to the climate and nature crises. And hopefully that sets us up to have a really interesting and provocative debate in our 2 panel sessions. So first, it's important to remind ourselves that in December of 2019, the European Union set out strong ambitions in the European Green Deal, particularly for Europe to be the first climate neutral continent. It recognized the fundamental principles that are still true today, so that that climate change and environmental degradation are an existential threat to Europe and the world, and that it is possible to transform the EU into a modern, resource-efficient, and competitive economy. The strategy set out growth ambitions that aim to protect, conserve, and enhance natural capital, while also protecting the health and well-being of citizens. And the key principles that we need to ensure are, first, that Europe meets the target of no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, that economic growth is decoupled from resource use, and that no person and no place is left behind. So since 2019, we have seen the European Commission fund programs of research that uphold these principles. However, we've also witnessed climate-related disasters that are continuing to increase in both their frequency and intensity. We now have overshot the 1.5 degrees of global warming, and there are growing ethical concerns that we've not adequately represented Indigenous and local knowledge from partners in solutions to the climate and nature emergencies, particularly those from low to middle income countries. So there's a gap in building their long-term capacity in human resources and research infrastructure sufficiently enough to ensure that we are having these equitable partnerships for future endeavors. So the Draghi report on EU competitiveness released last year gives stark warnings about keeping the EU's fundamental principles in mind while establishing an EU-wide coordination framework to look after key priorities. And so it's with all of this in the background and in this context that we put forward the insight paper, and that these complex challenges require new ways of working that draw on expertise from across disciplines, across sectors, to understand the interconnectedness and interdependencies across the EU priority areas. So university research, innovation, and education need to continue to play a key role in evidence-informed knowledge for policymakers to ensure that we have a safe, affordable, just, and sustainable future. So the insight paper describes the need for universities to be credible leaders as actors, producers, and communicators of knowledge. And the Guild calls on universities, policymakers, and funders to commit to 5 areas of action. So these are in research, education, mobility, campuses, and what we call the 3rd mission. So within the paper, each of these areas has a summary of the current landscape and recommends actions that should be taken to help achieve a sustainable future. For each of these areas, we've also compiled a set of pioneering sustainability practices to serve as models of best practice and case studies from across our member universities. So our call in research is about strengthening basic and applied research and promoting knowledge-based innovation in solutions and practice. In education, we call for embedding challenge-led critical knowledge of sustainability and practical skills. We call for universities to develop mobility practices that account for environmental costs of travel. We recognize that our own operations need to decarbonize and find innovative ways to incentivize sustainability, possibly through ways incentivizing healthy food consumption, for example. And we also need to address the costs of our research activities, things that are carbon intensive, like laboratory use. And finally, we can call on universities to strengthen their commitment as civic actors through engagement and collaboration with the public to co-produce meaningful solutions. So universities are responsible for educating current and future generations of students. In this role, we need to be preparing our students to be global citizens. Our graduates need to be aware of and critically think about sustainability challenges. Increasingly, this responsibility extends to lifelong learners who find themselves as part of a workforce requiring skills, competencies to address the kinds of complex challenges related to the climate and nature crises and their subsequent social repercussions. So in addition to mainstreaming and embedding sustainability into the curriculum and to have challenge-led projects that give our students practical skills, the insight paper calls for policy and funding for pedagogical innovation for sustainable development education, the university leaders to provide discursive spaces for staff and students to develop a culture of awareness around the climate and nature crises, and universities to use national and international competency frameworks that articulate the value of sustainability, systems thinking, and problem framing. So one example of innovation in education comes from the University of Warwick. The two examples I'll give, one from teaching and one from research and innovation, are really showing how universities can act as civic actors within their own areas. But I know as we move to the panel discussions, we'll be moving that more into the global spaces as well. In this example, University of Warwick, in partnership with their local government, which is the Coventry City Council, they co-host the Sustainability Challenge annually. And in this program, teams of students apply their diverse skills to sustainability-themed objectives. And these come directly from the council. These are challenges that the council faces. And so through this experience, the students practice applying a wide range of skills for sustainability. They develop core skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork, and communication. And one of the really important aspects of this work is that they learn to collaborate and present ideas to partners and then navigate that space of negotiation. So this offers really tangible contributions to the university, to Coventry and their community and futures, and it helps the students develop the key skills required for a sustainable future. So the insight paper is rich with recommendations and examples of good practice focused on research and innovation. And this will be one of the core themes picked up by our first panel. As policymakers and funders turn their attention to AI, biotechnology, advanced materials, and the digital transformation, they tend to see research and innovation as drivers of economic growth. And what we're calling to mind today is that we must align this with the Green Deal objectives to prevent innovation that will require mitigation of unintended consequences into the future. So there's a need to foster excellent science that addresses the crises of climate, biodiversity, and deepening social divides. We call on policymakers and funders to set standards for disruptive cross, inter, and transdisciplinary research committed to achieving the Green Deal objectives, support equity and long-term capacity building in global and transcontinental research collaborations. It's really critical that local perspectives, problems, and solutions inform global strategies to address climate and nature crises. And this requires the full and equitable inclusion of local researchers and local institutions in the Global South. To policymakers, funders, institutions, and researchers, we call on you to foster research that generates knowledge on achieving systemic transformations and commit to addressing global and transcontinental research questions through equitable partnerships. So I've been fortunate to lead one of the research projects that is offered as a case study within the Insight paper. And this is a project called Gallant. Similar to the Warwick example, this sees our university, the University of Glasgow, partner with Glasgow City Council to engage with Glasgow as a living lab to trial new sustainable solutions throughout the city. Gallant takes a whole systems approach while addressing the city's key environmental challenges. The program considers the co-benefits and trade-offs for public health, well-being, the environment, and the economy. So you can see here just some of the areas in our work packages off to the right that we're engaging with the city on. And you can also see some of the creative ways in which we are engaging with the public and communities to get their perspectives on what they want their future places to look like. So Gallant aims to deliver the social priorities of the UN Sustainable Development Goals while remaining within the planetary boundaries of a 1.5 degree world, which we may need to have a look at. So to do this, we partner with the council, with C40 cities and the Donut Economics Action Lab, using donut economics as a framework to frame the challenges and solutions through social and ecological lenses. I'm not going to go into the details of what's on this slide, but by taking a deliberative systems approach means that we've undertaken mapping and framing of our research in a way that we deliver on a shared vision for a healthy, equitable, and sustainable future with a diverse range of over 300 stakeholders across the city. And so all of this is compiled and shared in this Thriving Glasgow Portrait Report. Co-production has taken place not only with all of those stakeholders, but also with the council and elected officials, with whom we are currently determining appropriate local, global indicators and metrics for the 44 dimensions across the donut. And these are going to feed into the city's impact assessment process and new plans and new policies coming out. One of the really nice things about using an internationally recognized framework is not only are we documenting the processes that we're using, we're also sharing this learning. And so the Donut Economics Action Lab holds a fora of cities who are increasingly finding agency by using this international systems framework for their work. And they're finding agency for change by taking holistic, value-led approaches to the climate and nature crises. So the EU is in a unique and crucial position as a transnational funder to set standards for disruptive, interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, and transdisciplinary research that keeps our commitment to tackling the climate and nature crises. At the same time, we need to make sure that equity and inclusion are fundamental values embedded in our learning and teaching, and embedded in how our research problems are identified, how research teams are formed, and that credit is shared and the results are made widely available. So thank you for your time today. I really encourage you to check out the Guild's Insight paper, which is titled Universities in the Face of the Climate and Nature Crises, Redoubling Our Commitment to a Sustainable Future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you for this really important presentation with a very thought-provoking image at the end. It's really extraordinary to see this conversation going at a time when Europe, of course, is really trying to focus really also on its urban environment and making those really sustainable and sort of living labs really for the future in terms of the Green Deal objectives. So That's really great. And we'll come back, of course, to these points in the further discussion. So thank you very much, Jamie. I'm now want to lead to our next colleague who's going to speak. That's Morten Dahlen from the University of Oslo. Morten has been leading on our previous Insight paper on the digital transformation. But in writing this paper, and of course, Morten Dahlen is spent a good deal of time when he wrote this paper in our Brussels office in Brussels, meeting actors. So Morten, you know the scene here very well. But you made the argument already in that paper with your group that as we think about the digital transition, we also really need to think about the green transition, that we can't really think of those in separate ways. So it'd be really interesting to hear your short reflections on how this new Insight paper on addressing the nature and climate crisis, how that aligns with you and your arguments. Morten.
Thank you very well. I think they aligns very well. I haven't been able to read it in detail yet, but I will say a few words about the previous Insight paper from almost 2 years back, where we discussed for more than 2 years how the green and the digital transition is aligned and should be aligned to connect better. And I have to say that it basically, it started as a type of two questions. The first question was, what should be Europe's digital research and innovation agenda to achieve a successful green transition of society? So me, you, and a lot of people across Europe, we started to discuss that question. Very soon, we came into the other question below: how can we ensure that the digital part of the world becomes greener? And of course, looking into that, we came into various examples, and I've collected one example lately. You see three numbers. The upper one is 150, and then 500 and 1500, and that's terawatt hours used per year. 150 terawatt hours, that's approximately the amount of energy the whole of Norway is using for 1 year. In 2015, that was the energy used by data centers across the world. In 2025, the amount is 500 terawatt hours in these data centers, and that's more than 3 times as much as the whole of Norway. And both Bloomberg and McKinsey has estimated what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. That will increase by 3 times as much. And of course, if you get to 1,500 terawatt hours, that's compared to Norway about 10, 11 times as much energy as the whole of Norway is using. And of course, with this growth, you also use all the new renewables that are being produced, so that when we make new renewable energy, we can't take out the fossils, because it's needed for these enormous growth. And this is mainly due to AI these days. But it's not only about energy, it's also about using water in these data centers for cooling down the centers. But more important than that is the use of materials that we have to collect from a vulnerable nature. So the growth, the digital world itself is using a lot of resources and basically slowing down the things that we need to do in order to meet the climate changes that we see. And of course, what we have done in this paper, we basically put up 4 perspectives. We can't do this in short term, so aligning short-term actions with long-term knowledge development. That's why we call this paper the Twin Transition Center. We have to look 10, 15, 20, 25 years ahead in order to see how these can be changed, but at the same time take short-term actions. So what kind of digital research enabling the green transition? There is a big chunk of the paper is about that. What should be the priorities in Europe in order to help out to make the green transition more efficient? And of course, then we come back to that question: how could we make a climate-friendly, digitized society? And at this point in time, this is probably the most critical thing, because we have this growth of AI, and in particular the language machineries that is using a lot of energy, not only to produce the language models or the image models or whatever, but also that the use of it when we are doing the queries, we are also using energy. And of course, and as we collect more and more data in these data centers, that is also using energy. And at the end, we couldn't do this without seeing the breadth of sciences. What do we need besides the digital area in order to do it? And it's basically taking into account the breadth of sciences. And a lot of things within humanities and social sciences is equally important compared to natural sciences and technology, where I come from. So what we see here is a huge challenge that we have to bridge the efforts between different sciences across the breadth of everything we're doing. And at that point, we selected 3 particular challenges. Is that, okay, the first one is kind of obvious, and the second one is kind of obvious, and the third one is, of course, also kind of obvious. So in order to make the green transition as efficient as possible, we have to dig deeply into the energy transition. How can we do that? How can AI help? Because AI can also help making the energy transition more efficient. What can we do in order to save nature or minimize or the biodiversity challenges that was mentioned in the previous talk? But we cannot do this without making it just a transition that is for everyone, everywhere, as been stated in the European Green Deal. When we're going to that paper, I'm going to finish in a few seconds. We have we have about overall 13, 14 high-level recommendation. There is also a few more low-level recommendation when it comes to the digital sciences and digital research. But one of the things that we actually mentioned, that was, we said 2 years ago, and I still think it's important for the countries in Europe and Europe itself to create twin transition research programs. So that's towards funders, but also try to find what are a twin transition governance model. How can these 2 big transitions be aligned better? And there are a lot of thinking about it in Europe these days. But we are far from at a level where we do this together. At least I can say that on behalf of Norway, we are not even close. And I don't think we are very close in Europe either when it comes to looking at the big historical digital transition that has been going on for many years, and the growing green transition, where it's very, very closely linked, and how these 2 can be governed in a better way. And in order to do that, we need to do a lot of research, also fundamental research. So our recommendation, well, one of the main recommendation is twin transition research programs, or twin transition research programs across Europe. Thank you. I think I've used my 5 minutes. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Morten. And yes, a lot of congruence with his new insight paper when it comes to the importance of the entire research and innovation pipeline. I think a lot of congruence on the need for interdisciplinarity, and really I think it lines really well with Jamie's paper about how we really need to see interconnectedness and the complexity of the challenges that we have ahead. And I think the growth in energy usage that we're going to see is quite staggering, really, and clearly is something to take on board very seriously.
And thank you very much. I'm looking forward to read the new insight paper. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And so this is a good segue then to our first panel. So I'm really delighted to welcome Frank Siebern-Thomas, who is the head of unit of the Fair Green and Digital Transitions Research at DG Employment in the European Commission. And Frank leads policy development on the social and employment aspects of green and digital transitions. He's a graduate, amongst others, of the European University Institute in Florence, but also of UC Louvain. We have Michael Schäffer, who's the president of the EIC board at the European Innovation Council. We're very honored to have him here in our panel as well. He has over 30 years of experience in business, academia, and public policy, and has a strong focus on breakthrough technologies, disruptive innovations, and startup investment in his current portfolio. Mette Halskov Hansen is the Vice Rector for Climate and Environment at the University of Oslo. She leads initiatives on sustainability, interdisciplinary research, and the university's carbon footprint, so very wide-ranging portfolio, and she's an example of the growing number of universities that actually have now a Vice Rector for Climate in their institutions to lead the transversal ways in which universities address the climate and nature crises. And then we have Thomas Breu, who is the director of the Center for Development and Environment at the University of Bern, and he's also professor of sustainable development. The center is a Swiss national center of Swiss Center of National Research on this topic, and Thomas is specialized in global change, policy dialogue, and sustainable land management. Welcome to our panelists. If you switch on your cameras, then we can proceed. And maybe if I ask the first question, if I may, to Frank. Frank, our paper argues for the need. Hang on, are you here, Frank? I think
yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Perfect, yes. Okay, so our paper argues for the need to align the Green Deal objectives with other societal goals. But you as a policymaker have to work, you have to make decisions and choices about what you prioritize and how to fund it. So how do you make these choices, and what role does research have in your planning?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations on a truly insightful paper on an important topic, and highlighting the important role that universities and academia more generally have to play in this regard. I think the discussion comes at a good moment in time, where we are starting the implementation of new policy tools, the Clean Industrial Deal, the Social Climate Fund, and some others related to our discussion this morning. All the instruments which are being launched as part of the so-called 100-day initiatives of the new Commission. We have a competitiveness compass, a union of skills, youth policy dialogues, and so on. And all of those, we would argue, are based on solid scientific evidence, based on evidence-based policy making we try to promote here in the European Union. This said, I would like to make 3 points and say a word about the policy background and how we see it, the role of research, as you said, and the instruments we try to develop, and how we make use of research and policy making. And the 3 points I'm trying to make is, I think, in relation to your paper, and I agree with what the previous speakers have presented and highlighted. I would argue that we are aligned. We don't start from scratch, but a lot more needs to be done. And also, we're not alone, as we engage with many stakeholders, member states and others in this process. So on the policy part, I think the roadmap is clear. The new Commission has set 7 clear priorities, most notably to ensure a competitive, prosperous, and fair economy. So ensuring that the transition leaves no one behind has been reaffirmed. No transition can succeed without people. And fairness in this context, as others have stressed this morning too, is not just a nice to have, but an economic, social, and moral imperative to ensure that efforts, costs, and benefits are fairly shared and empower every person, every region to be an actor of change. So I think on this we are aligned. This requires interdisciplinarity. And actually the work we have started in DG Employment, as we are a new research DG, we are obviously a long-standing policy DG and funding DG. But a few years ago, in 2019, we had our annual and flagship report, Employment and Social Developments in Europe, which looked at the topic of economic, social, and environmental sustainability at large. And it argued that those 3 have to go together and cannot be disentangled. So with this, we agree, and we think that the new Commission is setting signs in this regard. You have a new Executive Vice President for Clean, Just, and Competitive Transition with Commissioner Ribeira. You have a commitment in the Fit for 55 legislative package to put this in practice, and also the President in her speech presenting the priorities said that we must focus now on implementing the existing legal framework for 2030 in the simplest, fairest, and most cost-efficient way, and this included a commitment to just transition. Now, what have we done in this context? We are not alone here. We have, in the context of Fit for 55, in July 21, that was actually when this unit was set up, and we're a unit with a double mandate to work on fair transitions, policy analysis and policy development for fair transitions, and to contribute to research programming. So we really are a bit at the core of what you're discussing here, and I'm very grateful for many ideas you're giving us. The first thing we were tasked to do was to negotiate with member states a council recommendation on ensuring a fair transition. Why is that? Because we felt that this commitment needs to be put in place at all levels, national, subnational, and by all actors using a whole of society approach. This recommendation was negotiated. We follow it up with member states regularly and evaluate and monitor its implementation. And this recommendation had also a reference to the role of research. It included an agreement to strengthen research and innovation actions at regional, national, and union levels to enhance the modeling and assessment of the macroeconomic, employment, and social dimension of climate change. Why? Because we need to understand these factors. We need to understand the drivers. We need to understand the drivers of perceptions and many others to do policies. So research has a key role to play here, and as DG Employment, we have a double role. First, to co-create Cluster 2 of Horizon Europe, and in particular the destination on social and economic transformations. And our second priority is to mainstream employment, social, and skill issues across the program, including in other parts of the program and other clusters, digital, climate, and energy, and many others. So in this context, we have drafted a number of topics, for example, on emerging work trends on European welfare systems, policies which can reduce inequalities, on skills gaps and mismatches, on beyond GDP frameworks and well-being indicators, and many others. We also have tried to develop innovative instruments, which we believe are in line with the recommendation to increase interdisciplinarity. For example, there's a pilot going on, a societal readiness pilot in Cluster 5 of Horizon Europe, which is the cluster on climate, energy, and mobility. And this pilot tries to integrate social sciences, humanities, and social considerations better from the outset of technological developments and boost interdisciplinarity by further integrating social sciences and new funded innovation projects, by encouraging project partners in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to work more closely with SSH partners. This can go beyond SSH flagging and thereby co-create to an important objective. We also asked for a specific opinion to the expert group on ethics and science and technology on the ethical considerations of the green transition. And here, obviously, too, this is addressed to an interdisciplinary body. Now, let me finish by saying we are also developing a number of innovative tools. We're carrying out also in-house research together with the Joint Research Center and others on more short-term needs, directly policy-related needs. For example, we have built a modeling capacity with the Joint Research Center we call AMEDI, Assessing and Monitoring Employment and Distributional Impacts. We try to use this to better assess whether the distributional impacts of climate and environmental and energy policies. We have a project to address carbon inequalities and estimate consumption footprints at European level. And we also here, this was mentioned before, work both at carbon inequalities within our economies and societies, but also at international level. And for example, at the global level, we are organizing every year with the International Labour Organization a Just Transition Pavilion at COP, which is a policy tool, but it's open to researchers and side events for researchers to present their findings and bring them into the negotiations on just transition in this context. And we do have, for example, a project on estimating transport poverty. How can we better assess who are the vulnerable households in this transition? As I said before, we think what's important is to understand and quantify these emerging challenges to improve policy making. And let me give one example of the use we do in research of these research findings, in addition to assessing policy pathways, and policy impacts of member states' policies. We also use them to feed directly into funding mechanisms, which are part of the Just Transition Framework, in particular the Social Climate Fund. And here, for example, member states will have to present by mid-year national plans, which also assess who are the vulnerable groups and what are the estimated distributional impacts of energy price and transport price increases due to ETS2, and what are the expected impacts of their measures. So here again, the focus is on assessing distributional impacts of policies. And I think we also need to know more about what are the costs of inaction, or what are the distributional aspects of inaction, because we cannot oppose action, costly action, action with distributional impacts to doing nothing. We understand that this is not an option. Also, and in particular, if we take into account social and employment impacts. I can probably say a bit more later if there's an interest on tools we're setting up here to foster this. I'll mention we're setting up a European Fair Transition Observatory, which should be an evidence-based collection tool to collect information on policies, best practices, and data and impacts. This relies on research and research findings, and we think it's important to collect this and make this available to policymakers, the broad public, to have a transparent dialogue on the effects and the state of just transition. And second, we have proposed in the Horizon Europe Strategic Plan 25-27 to set up a first partnership in Cluster 2, a partnership on social transformations and resilience. And this partnership is supposed to have 4 impact areas, including one on future of work and one on fair transitions toward climate neutrality. And we are about to send out a funding request to member states and associated countries, and hope that this could be a tool which is also in your interest and can further promote and strengthen research in this area. Thank you very much, and happy to take comments and questions.
Thank you, Frank. And let me move straight to Michiel. Michiel, the EIC's mission is to identify, develop, and scale up breakthrough technologies and game-changing innovations. But you as a funder are desperately short of money if I think about the number of excellent projects you could fund and what you're actually able to fund. So with that in mind, how do you decide between, supporting outstanding proposals, deep tech, or in Green Deal objectives? I mean, do you have those kinds of priorities in terms of what you're able to fund?
Yes, the system is able to do priorities because in the EIC we have challenges, and so around 45% of funding goes to challenges, and within those challenges, often challenges are related to the built environment, to agricultural transition, food transition, to molecules for alternative energy sources, storage and energy. So basically, we have a number of themes we are funding, and we also have an objective that 1/3 of the funding should go to Green Deal related projects. However, the big dilemma is that in the open program, the medical disciplines are very good. So in the practices, we are far below the 30% Green Deal related projects. And the medical clusters are altogether about 45% of what we fund. So there's an imbalance between, let's say, the policy objectives and what happens in reality. But we have instruments able to steer the portfolio.
And would it be possible to select more drivers to boost that rate of sustainability innovation that you can fund?
Well, one thing is it would be possible, for example, to change the balance between challenges and open. And the board is looking at how that could be advised for FP10. So to increase the level of challenges and to do a slightly smaller share of open, that's one thing. The second thing, which is very important, and that's also why I'm very pleased to be able to speak here, is to activate the ecosystem to come with more and better proposals in, let's say, the green themes.
And is there anything in terms of your work with universities that you observe that universities could do better as they engage with the EIC? I mean, this is, of course, an issue about sustainability, but you were talking about the ecosystem, so this is probably also a more general point.
Well, it's very different. I mean, schematically, we have 2 main instruments, Pathfinder and the Accelerator. Pathfinder is really projects that have that are collaborative, so different universities and partners across Europe. Universities are quite dominant in the Pathfinder, and one is to have universities working clearer on, let's say, green topics in the Pathfinder. That's one side. The second side is the Accelerator. The Accelerator is an instrument for spin-offs, often spin-offs of university, and there the question is the spin-off system, let's say, squeezed towards a certain sector. I noticed in some universities, especially the one in the city where I live, where the academic hospital is extremely active, and most companies we fund in that city are spin-offs of the academic hospital. So they have well organized that. Whereas, let's say on other themes, the spin-offs are much less well supported. So that might make a difference. In general, let's say the hospitals have a very good, university hospitals have a very good spin-off. So that basically creates a bit of an imbalance in our portfolio.
Okay, but that's clearly also a plea for us to think through also, I presume, about how we can strengthen social innovation more, that also affects the Green Deal. I mean, do you have a way in which you can, how do you think about social innovation where maybe the impacts are less quantifiable than in other sort of economic areas? Is that an issue for you? Is that a debate in the EIC?
Well, what is the debate is that we want to help both in the Pathfinder and in Accelerator. We want to help projects that have a clear vision of a societal challenge and how to address it in society. So the Pathfinder is not, let's say, a purely academic technology push exercise. No, there should be a societal vision that has to be developed during the project, and that should happen more often, I would say. The second one is companies we fund in the Accelerator they have to survive on the basis of turnover. So they have to find clients, applications, and those clients can be public authorities. So to engage with cities is quite important, but also engage with a society in order to get demand. However, we do that, let's say, on a project by project basis. There is no overarching philosophy and support to gain societal adhesion. That's really the responsibility of each project coordinator.
Thank you. Mette, can I maybe turn to you? I've already referred to your transversal portfolio across the university. So that means that you are really in charge of making sure the sort of sustainability is part of everything that the university does. But of course, the university does lots of things and has lots of commitments, some of which may not be particularly sustainable at all. So how do you go about strengthening sustainability without weakening other key objectives?
Yeah, that's a good question. Can you hear me actually?
Mm.
Yeah, okay. It's a good question. I think for me, there's really no contradiction between keeping the flag very high for academic freedom, focus on excellence in research, focusing on new types of education, and then at the same time, putting a lot of emphasis on everything that has to do with sustainability. We are prioritizing all the time. Universities which are, I think there are a few of them, but the universities which would say we cannot prioritize sustainability because we don't want to break down or to challenge academic freedom, they are prioritizing anyway. So every time we give money to something, whatever it is, even if it's something we have given money to throughout history, it's still a priority. We are still prioritizing. So I think it's no problem. It's a matter of choice to say that we cannot afford, not only money-wise, but also society-wise, planet-wise, we cannot afford in our universities not to put emphasis on research and education and our own practices and dissemination related to sustainability. We don't have a choice. And it's a leadership responsibility to do it. We cannot in our universities wait for sort of everything coming bottom up.
And what do you find is maybe the biggest challenge in this approach?
There are many challenges. I think let me answer with the opposite question. What is the easiest part of it? The easiest part is that actually, even though we see in our societies, as I think both Morten and you and Jamie pointed to, that we have maybe less focus on climate and environment now because of all the other challenges that, if we can call it that we are facing. Even in spite of that, I think most of our researchers and also very many of our students, maybe also most of them, are very much aware that we really need to do, we have to work on climate and environment and sustainability and on changes. So that's the easiest part. It's not so difficult to get people on board and find the need to do it. The difficult part, of course, is it's a little bit boring to say it, but of course it's always how to finance it. Because I mean, in times when universities come under pressure, economic pressure, and also in times where we are asked to put more money into the military, into security, into preparing ourselves for the worst case scenarios, then it's not so easy maybe to argue that you need to put more money into to changes and sustainability, and especially maybe into experiments with how to do the best research, how to do the best teaching. You want to play safe in a way. So I think it's very good to hear that. It's very good to know that the EU are actually working on these issues, and that there's an interest in trying to get more research. If we call it green research, I don't know. It's not a good term, but I mean that there really is an interest. But I think within universities, people in leadership have a responsibility to prioritize money for this. So of course we have to ask for external funding, and we need to get more external funding, but we also have an internal responsibility to try to work with this.
Thank you. And so maybe on that note, Thomas, can I turn to you? So I think that I remember when the University of Bern joined the Guild as its 19th member, and before it joined, I visited Bern, and one of the things that the rector really wanted me to see was the CDE. So it was at that time already clearly a source of pride for the university. But of course, you are not just operating for the university. You are a national center of excellence. I've already mentioned this, but you also have a really global remit. So in how do you achieve your mission in partnership with other actors, especially in lower and middle income countries?
Thanks very much, Jan. Yeah, good to know that the rector was quite positive about our center. It's always helpful to get this support. So actually, CD's mission is actually to contribute to knowledge and expertise for transformation towards sustainable development. So that is not all too new, I think. However, I'm convinced that any impact-oriented research cannot be done in a meaningful way within our national borders or the EU borders. So, in other words, sustainability challenges, be it climate change, biodiversity, but also inequalities and so on, they do not stop at our borders. And further, how our planet will look like in future generations, I'm strongly convinced that it will be decided on how things play out, namely in the global south. If low-income countries follow our way of development through more resource and energy consumption, then I think the situation for all of us looks quite bad. And further, I'm also convinced that we should not perceive low-income countries as problematic regions where all is doom and gloom. I know and I'm convinced that many good solutions exist, particularly also in developing countries. So the question is rather how we can tap on this, how we can bring them everywhere and adapt them to the respective local context. So to this end, CD is privileged to engage in research partnerships with the Global South. And to this end, we are happy that we can look back to more than 40 years of cooperation, namely in Africa, in Asia, but also in Latin America. However, research partnerships beyond EU or the OECD countries, it's somewhat a tricky business, I have to admit. It needs a lot of trust, and trust needs continuity and takes long to get built up. To make a difference, be it on a capacity difference, be it on an individual, but also on an institution level. However, to do so, to get to this kind of continuity and long-term perspective, it's quite challenging because the current ways of cooperation and the funding schemes, they follow a project logic, maybe 4 to 6 years. So there we have to work on. And also regarding our commitment, we believe that if we deem knowledge and scientific capacities a prerequisite of sustainable development, it can't be conducive that the scientific capacities are so unevenly distributed. So just a small comparison. The 150 poorest countries, they have just 6% of the world's research spendings. I think it's worth the investment to make more, to get engaged. Because what happens in the global south, it will affect us. So it's really worth the investment.
Mm-hmm. Can I actually put, so there was a question in the Q&A part that I would like to bring to the panel, and there's, because I think Thomas, I think it's appropriate to raise this now because you raised the issue of resource, and Frank, maybe to this kind of the policymaker in the room here. I mean, how do we prioritize? I mean, given that is there an effective trade-off now between defense and sustainability spending? Is there, or you don't just have to take defense. I mean, if you think about competitiveness, in Draghi, there still seems to be an alignment, but all the talk now is about competitiveness, and so the Green Deal objectives appear to fall a little bit under the radar. Is this just an impression that's false, or how does one deal with this? And maybe if you could also link that answer back to Thomas's point about the external dimension, that in a sense, in order to address the climate nature crises meaningfully, we really have to, we can't just look at the EU.
Yes, not an easy question. I did mention the partnership we're trying to build. That's a relatively small scale one, which is one where we try to gather at least 120 million for a multi-annual research program. So it's something which allows to go beyond single funding on these topics. And I'm happy to share a platform, a link to a platform with you. This is something we are building now as we speak. So if that's of interest, please also feel free to put comments on what you expect such a partnership to do. From a policy angle, I try to say that, yes, we agree that it's not about just an EU or national perspective. It's not just about a EU policymaker perspective. It's a whole society approach. It's a global approach, and we try to use different instruments to do that. Research funding is one of them, and I'm afraid I can't say or reveal, or I just don't know. Can't say anything now here about future funding priorities and financing. How I would interpret it and what I try to say is I don't think that there's less focus than in the past on this. The commitment to implementation of the Green Deal includes, as I said, the commitment to just transition as well. And the Commission last year submitted a proposal for the intermediate target, emission reduction target by 2040 of 90% emission reductions, the 2040 climate target plan. This is not yet enshrined in law, but there will be a revision of the European climate law. This paper had a specific focus on a number of enabling factors, including solidarity, including social policy, including all of those. And it highlighted that both just transition and sustainable competitiveness are equally enabling enablers or drivers of the transition. So we probably have to do more work to work out that narrative. We probably have to do also more work on the synergies between the green and the digital transition, because digitalization will be one of the main drivers of the green transition. However, it bears risks, as other speakers said. And I think these are both research areas where we need more research, not less, and make it work, because we will not succeed the green transition without a human-centered digitalization and AI, and we will not succeed a just transition without competitiveness, and vice versa. We will not succeed, achieve sustainable competitiveness without justice on the way as we go along. I wanted to add, if I may add 2 points. One on the external dimension. I already mentioned our initiatives in the field of COP. We are also active in what's called the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is linked to mission innovation, so also research actions here. And in that context, we have launched a new campaign on sustainable lifestyles, fairness, and access to clean energy technologies. This is in the making. We are about to draft a pledge inviting partners. So far, China, Japan, India, Norway, and other actors have signaled interest to join this pledge. And we want, I'm saying it here to highlight that we believe that the focus on behavioral change, on sustainable lifestyles, and on fairness along the way has to be part of the game. As other speakers said, yes, we also need to help third countries to make that step and not follow the same unsustainable development model as we may have done in the past. I think that's part of this partnership. Whether there's sufficient funding, as I said, my personal view, but is we cannot play one against the other. The green transition is also vital to achieve security and to secure independence, let's say, of unreliable partners along the way. So one without the other doesn't make sense. They have to go together, and sustainable in SDGs in the long run obviously remain the main target. And I want to make one last comment, which is also, I think, an important research area. The mission letter of Commissioner Hoekstra also refers to the need to fight misinformation, fake news, and create awareness of the opportunities and costs of this transition. Here again, research, I think, is much more research is needed, including the living labs or others. So just to say, it's a plea, at least from our angle, and we are fighting for this also from an angle of teacher employment and social affairs, that there's need for more research, more interdisciplinary research, and linking those and ensuring funding for all of this, however difficult it is, because we cannot play one priority against the other.
Thank you, Frank. Michiel, you want to come in?
I just want to say, or to confirm one sentence that Frank said, is that in all the documents on competitiveness, you see the imposed strategic sovereignty of Europe. And since we are net importers of materials, energy, and proteins, getting more autonomy on those three is quite essential for the competitiveness of Europe as well. So I don't see a balance against that yet. Another point is that Horizon, so the whole research policy, has still only a civil objective. So there's not yet a legal base that enables defense funding, of defense research funding, out of the Horizon program or the EIC. However, the Commission has announced last week that it might come with proposals to change the legal base and to allow dual-use research, if the Parliament, of course, and member states agree with that.
Michiel, can I actually ask you a question that's not a follow-up question, but is on a slightly different track, but I think very important, which is what do you think universities can do to integrate sustainability in their knowledge valorization practices? So as an investor in startups and scale-ups, how can the EIC investigate the environmental criteria in its investment decisions?
Well, we have a number of so it's two questions at once. One thing I've also seen as the Q&A, it might be interesting for universities to consider a more, let's say, thematic focus in their support structure. So what we see now basically is overall the best universities give a support structure whoever needs it, but there is very few universities have, let's say, a content-based focus. And if they have it, for example, the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands, yes, of course, they have an agro-food focus because it's an agro-food university. So that's one thing. The second thing is your question. Please repeat it again.
So it was the, as an investor in startups and scale-ups, how can the EIC integrate environmental criteria in its investment decisions?
Yeah. So one is by, let's say, the challenges. The second one is, let's say, there is a principle of no harm. So the project, each project is evaluated whether there's an environmental harm foreseen in it. If that is the case, it is a negative advice, and then the juries integrate the environmental dimension when they evaluate proposals. And ultimately, in the investment decision, there could also be no-go if indeed there is, let's say, a serious harm or a serious negative aspect. So it is a part of the evaluation process. And
can I ask you a final question, Michiel, or just just find a segue around societally responsible knowledge valorization. So we see in the Netherlands and Flanders, for instance, that there are efforts coming, especially from university hospitals, to develop societally responsible licensing practices. So is this a model maybe for the EIC also to pursue, or is this something you think should really happen at national levels?
Well, I mean, the Commission is preparing a European Innovation Act and a European Research Act, and it may recommend, let's say, a level playing field or standards on valorization. The EIC board has advised on valorization and, for example, the level of royalties and the speed by which universities gives out licenses. So we have a basis on that. What I see is that it is favorable for innovation if universities are relatively fast in providing licensing, and the Dutch and the Austrians have developed a model to do that. And it helps also, I see that in evaluations, when the royalties required are on the low side. So let's say below 10%. If it's higher, or the share of universities in a startup is, let's say, over 25%, that really hampers let's say the power of a spin-off. So that's an important dimension, and I think it would be worthwhile. So we would advise that to have, let's say, a European standard of, let's say, valorization.
Thank you. I have a question directly to Mette from Baron in the Q&A. But before I ask this, Mette, before we come to that, I'll just put it maybe a general point to the panel, whoever might wish to respond to it, which is kind of maybe for us to reflect also on how we can respond, whether we need to respond to pressure coming now from the United States to sorry, there I said it, to effectively not commit to addressing climate change in through our research. We've had a questionnaire being sent to many universities, many institutions, many researchers to declare to what extent we are pursuing this kind of research. And that might, of course, change also how we work with the Global South, because it's not just our universities that will have received it. And there's a question, I think, not so much about the United States, but really also about to what extent that might change what we do, or should change what we do, or in fact not. It's just a general issue. I think that's all on our minds. But Baron asked Mette, you did talk about the importance of senior leaders taking responsibility, but how can we persuade senior leaders to do so?
Wow, so now we have the question on the US. It's tempting to jump right into that, but the other question is also very good. How can where do you want me to go first? To the academic leaders. Let's start with the academic leaders. They are the easy part, I think. No, indeed, this question is good, and actually I have quite often been asked that question. So when I argue that it's a leadership responsibility to really redirect universities towards a stronger emphasis on sustainability, people often ask, yeah, so how do we do that if the leadership is not really on that page? I think there are basically two ways to do it. First, if you are in a position where you elect your leadership, as we are in right now in Oslo, you elect leaders who are actually on the right page towards supporting sustainability. If you are not in that position, the main thing that can persuade, in my experience, university leaders to take a different direction, that is if their researchers are able to get external funding supporting certain topics and certain areas of research. So indeed, we now have all these possibilities to apply for research within the broad field of sustainability, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary research, which tries to answer the biggest questions. And if researchers are able to tap into these funds, that's very helpful for leadership in the university, because that makes it easier to prioritize. Apart from that, I don't have many good advice to give. So I think I will stop with that.
Did you want to answer the other one as well or not?
Well, the US thing, I think, I mean, our position, at least in University of Oslo, is with these questions that I send out. We are not going to answer that, and we encourage all our scholars to not answer such questions coming from the US about whether we, for instance, collaborate with groups or countries which are socialist or communist, which indeed we do. We have a lot of collaboration with China, and we are completely agree with what Thomas said about the importance of collaborating with also the poorest countries and also the more politically difficult countries maybe. We need to find ways to collaborate on research. If the things which are coming out of the US now, we get a lot of questions, of course, from scholars who are in partnerships with US scholars who are put under pressure because of their climate research. And I think the right answer is, or not the right answer, but I think we just need to do even more in Europe. I think we cannot stop it. To the contrary, it just shows how important it is, maybe more important than ever, to really put focus on everything that has to do with climate, with environment, with inclusion, and with democracy.
Thank you. Michiel on these points, and Thomas. Michiel.
Well, one as a comment, I see a lot of universities or association of universities advising their members not to answer the questionnaire. I think that's a wise one. And the other one, I would say, Europe is made of 27 democracies plus a democratic European Union. It is very logical that the universities or any researcher, well, within academic freedom, complies with European policies and legislation, and that goes first. So and I'm agreeing with Mette that I think possibly we have also to think of what is the consequence of your American research policies. How can we attract talent here? But also, what do we need to share in terms of facilities to cover the gap? I mean, in some areas we no longer receive data from American institutions, so we have to match that ourselves. So, for example, I see also we have a substantial space portfolio in the EIC. That the space portfolio is quite important to generate our own satellite systems and our own information bases to, for example, monitor climate change if that is no longer possible with American data.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, also linking up to the statements of Mette, I think as researchers or members of university academic institutions, we really have to step up our engagement with policy and civil society. So we have not only to provide knowledge on, the situation looks that bad and this and that. Yes, it is. That is one part of it. But also showing possibilities and probabilities, showing the added value of research in order for transformations, or maybe rather change to the better. And and in this sense, also within our universities, but also the academic system at all, I think we have also to change there a little bit, because the rewards currently, there are still the papers published mainly. Even there is DORA and all these agreements that this shouldn't count as much as it did in the past. But really we have to invest also in our scholars, in our students, that they are able to engage in a dialogue and not only stay in the ivory tower. And with that, we can also exert a certain pressure on our leadership, but also we can bring about a change in the political perception of research.
And Thomas, can I just follow up before I turn to Frank? Just on this question on the US, what do you see? I mean, when you reflect on your work, your collaborators in the global South, they are of course not in the European Union. They don't have the EU as a defense mechanism, as it were, or the wider European framework as a defense mechanism. And they're more vulnerable to external funding in a sense, and external funding pressures. I'm thinking about not so much the US state, but many US foundations that invest heavily in African science, for instance, or in other parts of the world. To what extent are they vulnerable, do you think, through, if we think about not just climate change, but also equity was mentioned in the questionnaire. You know, are you concerned about shifts in sort of tectonic shifts in how we do research and how we can collaborate with these partners?
Yeah. So first of all, the slash and burn of USAID, but also the cut in research budgets, it has a tremendous effect, namely on Africa. So we were also part of several programs which were stopped immediately, given that the Americans withdrew. And there it is felt strongly in the global south what happens over there. So the question is also, it also shows how dependent we are, to a certain degree at least, from the US. And now it's the big question whether we can become more self-confident, our partners, and also that they do their homework. When we see how much African countries, for instance, how big their domestic spendings for research is, it's really almost ridiculously small. So there are other sources, there are other means, but it takes time. And for me, let's see, we have 3.5 years to go with the current administration. Let's see what happens in 2 years when the elections will take part for the House of Representatives. So but in general, I think to step up their own investments, the African countries are really called upon, and we in the north in Europe, we have also to see how we can do better, become less dependent also on US sources. But I have no recipe, sorry about. Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. But of course, this in that sense, we are fortunate that there is a distinct research and education pillar of the Global Gateway. So there are ways in which the EU can respond, and I think it's been really wise to have such a pillar. And of course, maybe that's also for us to reflect on how we can maybe adjust that as in this particular time of need, but also opportunity for Europe, it seems to me. But Frank, you wanted to come in on this discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. Just to confirm that what the previous speakers just said, the importance to reach out to stakeholders and involve other stakeholders and identify their needs and ensure feedback to policy of research. I shared in the chat one link to a project which the EU has been funding under another program, the Social Dialogue funding line, which is done the project by managers and sustainable leadership. And it's there to develop best practice on leadership and live it also for a business case and make the business case of mainstreaming sustainability in that area. So such projects do exist, and maybe we can reinforce linkages in both ways and bring research into those projects and vice versa. Have also social partners and companies, trade union representatives identify their research needs for their work. They don't look at it from a research angle, but I think identifying these needs is key. Also, one other, I think, strong reason for mainstreaming sustainability and boosting also private investments area is the need to invest more strongly in skills. To succeed our transition, we need to upgrade strongly, reskilling, upskilling, in sectors such as renewables and others. And I think this is also to be done by mainstreaming an interdisciplinary approach. And it's in the interest, again, of the all sides of the economy, including industry, to fund this reskilling, upskilling. And maybe there are then opportunities for also building partnerships with third countries in this area and building common skills to succeed this renewable transition. And last point, just to recall that Cluster 2, I mentioned Cluster 2 Horizon Europe before, has 3 destinations. The first one is on democracy. And yes, there are many projects being promoted also to look at democratic stability, polarization, society, and others. And this is vital also, not only for social cohesion, but for competitiveness overall.
Thank you. We have a question from Natasha. I think that's been answered, or that's been addressed at least in this last round, about, because she asked again about how we as academics can justify possibly turning away from sustainability focused research in response to some of these pressures, as after all we are guardians of scientific arguments, and so it is our duty in a sense to go against misinformation. So can we just put in there's a question from Guy Midgley, which is to hosts and panelists and not to everybody, but Guy, if I may actually bring this out more widely, Guy Midgley from Stellenbosch University, he asked whether it isn't a critical step to take stock of new and emerging alliances in the political sphere and to position the science effort in the light of these. So in other words, it's very unlikely that we will ever really see a return to a pre-January 6, 2025 situation. So I think so to a pre-Trump situation, right? Whatever happens within the next 3.5 years, the world will look very different to what it looked before last November. And so I guess there is a wider questions about how we can really position ourselves and I think a number of speakers have started to begin to think about this, but to really think through how we can maybe take up a more robust leadership role in this, and be really articulate in terms of what we need doing, noting of course that this is a global challenge and we need the US to be by our side. So I think that it doesn't resolve the question of how we take the US and other actors that are skeptical with us, I guess. Please respond if you have any comments on that. But otherwise, Thomas, if I may just quickly turn to you and talk a little bit more about the center and in sort of practice. Thomas, when I look, and I encourage everybody really to look at the CDE's website, because you articulate in a very impressive detail about how you address sustainability in its different dimensions and its different fields, and there's a very impressive chart there. But then how would you bring that together? How would you sort of define in 3 or 4 sentences, or really address in 3 or 4 sentences, kind of what the key contribution of the CDE is to research and to societal impact?
Thanks, Jan. Of course, I'm a little bit hesitant with self-praising. Yeah, and we really have to see knowledge and academic capacity is just one ingredient contributing to sustainability. Also, I perceive it as an important one. So what I'm proud of on our achievements over the last 40 years of our existence, most probably the strongest lever of our work is that we could train some committed and skilled individuals and building up capacity and institutional capacities, be it in Europe, be it elsewhere. So in concrete terms, we trained more than 300 PhDs on sustainability issues, and many of them are today in important functions, be it in politics, be it in the administration. And last but not least, about close to 20 professors emerged from our teaching and education efforts. So there, I think, building up capacities, engage people who can make through their individual capacities and engagement a difference. Most likely that was the most important point we could make.
Thank you. Michiel?
Yeah, I just want to make an observation from the last weeks, that we see at the European Commission and also the EIC an increased interest of third countries to cooperate with us. I'm going on a courtesy visit to Kenya next week, and when I planned it in December, it was still courtesy, and by now Kenya sees it really as important and strategic to engage more with the European research system. So I think that we should realize that we have, let's say, that the American politics also changes how the world looks at America and how it looks at us. So I think it's important to also to have that external dimension. And I'm very much agreeing with our gentleman from Bern that we have also to look, let's say, at the specificities of the Global South. And that's also my mission in Kenya, to see how can we adjust our priorities. No, how can we invite the Global South to define priorities in our research programs and our funding programs.
Thank you, Michiel. That's music to our ears in the Guild, because we work so strongly so closely with the Global South as well. Mette, Can I just ask you? So you've listened to Thomas. You've listened to this debate. You've just created a new center for sustainability that's transversal across. It's a research center, I believe, in particular. What do you hope to achieve?
Let me first say that this new center will be called Center for Global Sustainability. And there's a point that there's a reason for why we emphasize global, and the point that the reason is very similar to the arguments from Thomas. We don't want this to become a center for how to make only Norway more sustainable, although that is very much needed. But we are really building this center to work across different disciplines, work across the whole university, but very much also to build up even more close collaborations with research communities and institutions in Africa, in Asia, in South America, and so forth. And of course, it's a small brick in the big puzzle, but it's a very important one for our university, and I think also potentially for Norway, that we try to build something which has a more flexible structure, which really has a structure to support thematic research, as I think Michelle was also asking about the need for more sort of structural attempts to make it possible to do research within certain big themes. And that should be possible in this center. And we are learning from all the other centers like Thomas's. And just one final point, we are putting money into it. We are prioritizing it.
Great. Thank you very much. I have one final question, if I may, to Jamie. Maybe Jamie, if you could come back, because I'd love to ask you really about your work with societal actors and so you're working with the entire ecosystem of the city of Glasgow. So, societal actors, economic actors, the city council and so forth. How does your work as academics need to adjust for working with people who work with different timelines, different priorities? And I think it does relate to also a point that Guy Midgley put into the chat, this question of the sort of growing societal pushback against, prioritizing sustainability and sustainable development. How do you go against that in your work?
Yeah, thank you, Jan, for bringing me back in. So I should say that the Gallant project that I presented as a case study was funded as part of a strategic program from our Natural Environmental Research Council. And one of the things that was unusual about that funding compared to the typical calls that we see coming out is it's a 5-year program as opposed to a 3-year program. And what that allowed us to do, I guess in terms of societal actors, is 2 things. One is it was very clear that we wanted to collaborate with local communities as co-participants in our research, which means paying them as research as part of our research program when they give time and things like that to our event. And it's been really important in terms of building those trusted relationships over the first 18 months of the project. It's allowed us to engage with them and inform them as to the main environmental and sustainability challenges that the city faces, but it's also allowed us to set up community hubs and allow them, because we have flexibility with our funding, to actually bring them in and co-design the kind of solutions where they see the challenges that the city faces are ones that they want to address within their communities. So that's been really important. The other thing is having a really strong partnership with the local authority, with Glasgow City Council, from before we even put the proposal in, meant that we really were addressing challenges that were the council's challenges. We had a series of solution-focused dialogues that brought the researchers and practitioners together across the city so that we could really match and marry up where the challenges were and where we could bring the best kind of research skills to those problems. So that's been really important. And what we've seen, because we have a theory of a change associated with the Gallant project over the 5 years and beyond, was that as the council is facing issues around the economy, around you know, the cost of energy crisis for local authorities is really difficult. As they've had to turn their attention to other urgent things that have come up, what the university gets to do in this project with the funding that we have is keep our attention focused on those climate and sustainability challenges that relate to kind of the social and societal challenges as well. But we are able to keep progress moving on that wider those wider goals that the city wants to see, and so they can tune out and deal with things that are happening on kind of an urgent scale, but then when they come back and re-engage with us, we're still making longer term progress against those goals. So I think that societal engagement with those actors has been really fundamental to everything that we're doing.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for to this entire panel for your contributions. And I think that we will now move to teaching. But I think many issues have been raised that we need to consider more, which is really the societal impact and dynamics around teaching and education, which I think will be part of the next panel. I think we'll need to further explore the global north-south dimension of sustainability, also in how that is reflected in teaching, and indeed how more broadly teaching and education needs to take on board the cross-disciplinarity and transversal and complex and systems thinking dynamics that we need to have if we want to address the climate and nature crises. But thank you so much for this first panel, and I call now on a new set of colleagues to come into this panel. And I want to start really with Darish Ramjugannath from Stellenbosch University. Darish, I'm delighted that you're joining us. You are in your first day of office as the new Vice Chancellor of Stellenbosch. So first of all, many congratulations, I think, from us all here at the Guild. It's a particular delight to have you here because the collaboration with the African Research Universities Alliance has been really instrumental to who we are as a Guild and in addressing these questions around bringing equity to North-South collaborations. But it's also, and as part of that collaboration, of course, we've been working very closely with Stellenbosch. Many of our partner universities are working closely with the universities. So thank you very much for taking this time to be with us on this very important day for you.
Jan, thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure to join you. Yes, it's April Fool's Day, but no, I'm definitely in office today, and busy day. But I think it's a very important discussions that we are having, through this symposium, and I think it's important that we hear different perspectives. I think to hear South perspective, and in particular perspective from Africa and South Africa, is critical. So I'm very glad to be part of the discussions.
Wonderful. But I also, of course, we are joined by other equally distinguished speakers. So Susanne Konze, who's the head of unit of the higher education unit, DG EAC in the European Commission. And Susanne, you lead the development of the European education area's higher education dimension, and you're overseeing the higher education strand of the Erasmus Plus program. But also, I think really importantly, I think you have a grounding in university and in a university international office. So you really do know our lives and where we come from and how we tick. So it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. And we then are also joined from our own communities by Stephanie Panikeli-Bataya, who is the Academic Director for Sustainability at the University of Warwick. And you not only lead the institution's sustainability strategy, but you have also had an instrumental role in developing the Global Sustainable Development degree at the University of Warwick. We've already heard a little bit about this, but it'll be great to hear more. And last but certainly not least is Jaap Rohoff, who is the Program Manager for Sustainability in Education at Radboud University, where you oversee the integration of sustainability into all bachelor's programs. So that's, again, a hugely ambitious role, hugely important role, and we're delighted to have you with us and to hear more from you. So, colleagues, if I may start the discussion here, if I can find my papers, and here they are. Susanne, maybe if I may start with you. The Commission's 2020 communication on achieving the EEA advocated integrating environmental sustainability perspectives across all natural and human sciences, supporting shifts in skills, methods, processes, and cultures. So it really foregrounded environmental sustainability. And again, in 2022, the Commission followed up for education institutions to integrate environmental sustainability into every activity and to embed it into programs, syllabuses, and modules. But in 2025, the Union of Skills, it sort of talks about the environment, and green skills and competences, but actually it's clearly prioritizing technological and digital skills. So is that because it's mission accomplished? Is that because we've lost interest? I mean, how important is this still in the European Commission's approach towards educational strategy?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. No, it's not mission accomplished. I would love to say that it is mission accomplished, but I think we are probably we will not manage in lifetime to really accomplish this mission. And when preparing for the talk here today, I was thinking how to best maybe explain the behind it, and I came to a comparison which it might have some flaws, but nevertheless, after also following the discussion in the panel before, I dare to make it. It's a little bit like citizenship education. So it's an element of education which we can't miss anymore, which has to be an integral part of education in different aspects. And it has, in like citizenship, it has a bit the same challenges in front of itself. So you have to find the right way to teach it. You have to embed the work on this education in the whole education institution, be it higher education, be it a school, be it a vocational education and training center. And you have to keep it relevant and alive as a topic. And I think that in that way it is pretty much the same thing. And when we are looking at higher education, also there we are just in the panel before, the strong link between democracy, between academic freedom, but also sustainability, research and sustainability, and working on these topics. We have and I'm very happy about the paper the Guild is going to publish, because I think it addresses exactly these different elements sustainability has in education, being a subject in a way and something you really teach in a more theoretical way, but also being a part of the education institution, how the education institution acts, how for example, in higher education, how mobility is organized. In higher education, also the link to research is there, of course, very strong, and also keep it in the debates, and also the example of bringing it into the community and have this exchange with the community, I think is a key element there, and combines both topics in a way. For the Union of Skills, of course, there the focus is really on skills, on more technical skills, but it doesn't limit in any way the relevance of system thinking, the relevance of sustainability, the relevance of the topic as large. And I think also the contributions of Frank in the previous panel has made that very strong, how well it is sitting there. Also, if we are looking at the preparedness unit, we find even more elements which have a strong link to sustainability, which have a strong link to citizenship competences. So it really bring these two topics into the fore. Also to mention in that context that I don't see a divide between competitiveness and technological development and sustainability. It was just the opposite way around, as also the Draghi report indicates, but also when we are looking at different aspects of sustainability and of competitiveness, we see it has to go together. It can't go into kind of opposition to each other. We see it on the whole question of artificial intelligence. We see it on also the role of rule of law, of democracy, and of the sustainability also in business development. So I think there's a strong link between the two. So in this sense, I very much agree to main points mentioned and raised in the paper, definitely. I would like to give one example, maybe as to finish this first contribution. We are at the moment negotiating the European degree. and to really first and probably introducing it as a label for already existing joint study courses, but then also really to facilitate joint study courses across countries and between universities in different countries. And in the European degree, we are looking also at the different criteria for awarding a European degree or for saying this is a European degree. And one key point there is sustainability and environmental sustainability, but in general, this having that in the degree. And following the discussion also this morning, I'm even more convinced that this is the right way to go, because it leads, of course, it is a bit pushing maybe universities to look at it, but what we do not want is to influence on how they are teaching is, how they are addressing it, but that it is an element of it, and that it's an element of the reflection in a European degree and in a European study course. And I think there, in this way, also from our side, to give an impetus to really strengthen sustainability topics in higher education. I can also mention, of course, there are lots of Erasmus Plus funding issues, projects, and so on, but I leave that for the moment aside, and I would finish here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susanna. And Darish, can I turn to you? So in the first part of this discussion, when colleagues focused on research, I mean, there was a lot of consideration for how we bring different missions of the university together. But of course, from where you sit in South Africa, this will also be an issue, but it will have different complexities about how you bring a focus on sustainability and environment, on addressing the climate and nature crises, how you bring that together with all the other societal challenges that you face as a university, so many other things you need to do. Can you tell us a little bit about how you go about that? How might that be different for you as an African institution vis-a-vis the discussion that we're having in Europe?
Oh, thank you very, very much, Jan. I think it was very interesting listening to the discussion a bit earlier. It's important to acknowledge that while climate and nature crises are global, the way that we respond to it is shaped actually by our unique kind of contexts. And I think the context that we have on the African continent, and in particular in Africa, would be fairly different from what you would have in Europe. Now, in South Africa, sustainability is tightly woven into questions of social justice, inequality, and development. I think you may be aware that South Africa has one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world. So the kind of issues of inequality really come into play when you start talking around issues of sustainability. So, we got to talk about just transitions. In fact, one of the big things at the moment in discussion in South Africa and amongst government is about these just transitions, the whole energy issue and the kind of just energy transitions that we will have to undertake in South Africa become not theoretical discussions, but actually urgent, realistic discussions that are taking place on the ground at the moment in the country. So, many of our communities still struggle with issues around access to energy, education, basic services. So our approach has to consider the intersection of environmental concerns with the kind of real socioeconomic challenges that are being faced by the people at the moment in the country. In that regard, at Stellenbosch University, we are being deliberate about linking sustainability to these kind of transformational issues that need to take place. We understand that we can't drive environmental progress without addressing historical imbalances that we have and building capacity where it is most needed. And that plays out as well in terms of the way we look at the curricula at the institution, the way we undertake our research at the institution. It plays out in terms of the kind of academic offerings that our students have. It's not just about building in issues around sustainability and transformation into the formal main curriculum of the institution, but there's a lot of activities that take place in the co-curriculum space, in the extracurricular space that speak to sustainability and that intersection with the kind of transformational agendas that need to take place within the institution and within the country. One of the things I also want to highlight is the importance of genuine global partnerships. And at Stellenbosch University, in fact, I just went through a process of being appointed as the rector and the vice chancellor. And in my presentations to the university community and to the council of the university, there was 3 foci that I wanted to have, but one of the foci for the institution was on partnerships and sustainability, and the importance of partnerships and global partnerships in terms of driving sustainability issues and driving sustainability in a holistic sense. I think typically when universities start to look at issues around sustainability, they tend to narrow it to just financial sustainability. But really what we need to discuss is environmental sustainability and social sustainability that's linked to that. You know, the Guild Insight paper rightly points out that the imbalance in climate research funding that we have at the moment, you know, it's really out there. Only a small fraction reaches Africa, approximately 4%. And much of that still supports institutions outside of the continent. So we need to change that dynamic to shift towards more equitable long-term collaborations that includes and empowers local voices, the kind of African voices. You know, a lot of the impacts that we're seeing at the moment in terms of climate change are predominant on the African continent. So yes, we have the effects that are global, but I think in terms of a proportionality point of view, we see major challenges on the African continent. You know, so I have to say, climate change is not just an environmental issue. It's a developmental challenge, and our response must be just, inclusive, and deeply rooted in local realities.
Thank you very much, Suresh. And Susanna, may I come back to you on that in terms of the global dimension of Erasmus Plus, which is of course one of its key strengths, and it picks up also what I think Thomas was saying earlier about how we begin to comprehend these imbalances, also these financial imbalances between the global North and the global South. And as Deresh was talking about the particular ways in which this must be comprehended from a South African perspective, you know, I was struck by how much our students would have to gain by really engaging this, confronting these kinds of perspectives. Do you see ways in which Erasmus Plus can be strengthened in its global dimension in the future? It's always a question of money, but of course, you know, this could be a priority that European students and global students can generally benefit from to really make a transformative change, for instance, as part of the Global Gateway.
Yes, thank you. Well, talking money is at the moment really extremely difficult, no? And with the negotiations we have in front of us on the next funding period. But maybe taking from the situation today, we have at the moment Erasmus is funding international mobility, but not only with its, let's say, core funding, these 26 billion which are allocated to the program for the whole funding period, but also Erasmus is channeling also money coming from the external action initiatives. So a lot of money which is financing or supporting international mobility under Erasmus is coming from other funding sources. In the Global Gateway, education and research is one of the priorities, and in this context also, of course, Erasmus is then used as a tool to support international mobility stronger. And I think that is one thing which we are also in general looking at the program in future. What we would like to see is to have a better complementarity of the program with other funding sources, and really to enrich also the impact Erasmus can have. So to have more opportunities to use funding coming from other sources and in the program itself, using either national envelopes, using international funding, external action serve instrument funding, and of course the core funding. So I think what is important is for us to see that we get the setup right and really have then and on the one hand, a program which of course has enough own funding, but has also a possibility to contribute to other initiatives in a very agile and active way. In general, I think coming also from this discussion, I think there is a huge point in it that also not only would it be extremely good to offer students from other countries to come into Europe, but it is also equally good for students from Europe to go outside and to see other realities and get a better understanding. I think that is key for the development overall. And And there, I think what we would need is exactly to make this argument strong over the next months to come, and really to push for it, and really to argue for it, also in the context of ongoing negotiations. And there, really to be vocal about Erasmus and its international dimension, to be vocal about Erasmus in general, and the important contribution the program can make, and then also really to look at these points on, and that is something the Union of Skills does: attract talent, retain talent, facilitate mobility. So I think these are really things which we should look at and push for. And I think the debates are probably now starting in a couple of weeks, months' time, and will have to play a role in all EU member states to push also member states' positions in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. And we've had a long-standing plea or urge to the EU to make sure that indeed Erasmus and Horizon funding is actually becomes more compatible with other sources of funding, not least on to invest in infrastructures through NDG, for instance. And so this is we'll do everything that we can on our side really to reinforce that message. I think this is from our collaboration with the African Research Universities Alliances. This is indeed a key point. Jaap, can I turn to you? And really to reflect a little bit on the practice at Radboud University to try and drill down more into the university practice now. So you decided in 2022 that all programs should include sustainability in what they do. Is that even possible? I mean, how do you turn something like this into action?
Yeah, thank you, Jan, for your question. Yeah, in 2022, we started off with a program to integrate sustainability in all curriculum. So in all our 38 bachelor programs and our 7 faculties, there are links with sustainability. So it started off with our strategy, a significant impact, where we just try to find a natural place for sustainability in this curriculum. And we focus not only on the content perspective, but also thinking from skills, as other speakers mentioned, the system thinking and interdisciplinary thinking, reflectional skills. So these links could be different from each discipline. And the integral approach is actually based on the idea that a separate or a compulsory course could mean that the sustainability would be reduced to a subject or a must for students as well as educators. So that's why we started from the basis, from the disciplines. And let me give you a few examples on how this integration then takes shape. You could think of on principles of planetary health in medical sciences, the influence of software and AI and energy savings in computer science, climate change and liability, legal rights of nature in the law, and sustainable behavior change in psychology. So these are links that are made. I can tell you a little bit more later on the way we did this, but the basis from which we started and which made sustainability linked to our fields of expertise, but also our scientific research.
Thank you. And Stephanie, I mean, at Warwick, you also have an ambitious educational program on global sustainable development, but it's a slightly different model. Can you tell us just a little bit more in detail, kind of what's behind this, what's the philosophy, how, and what is it?
Thank you, Jan. Thanks for inviting me too. So yes, we have 2 projects in some way. We're also doing what Jaap has been talking about, but that's more recent. What you're asking me about is about our Global Sustainable Development Program. I'm going to call it GSD, if it's okay. We love acronyms in the UK. It's a bit easier to talk about it because I'm going to mention it several times. So yeah, that program was set up was launched in 2016. And it was very much inspired by what Ban Ki-moon had said in his speech when he launched the SDGs, saying that to tackle the world's biggest problems, we need to stop working in silos, right? So the program is very much an interdisciplinary program. So it doesn't sit within a specific discipline or within a specific department. A school was set up to host the GSD department, and it's called School for Cross-Faculty Studies, exactly to represent how interdisciplinary it is. So that is what is quite unique about it in some way, because there have been, since in the UK, some similar programs being set up, but they tend to be hosted in geography departments. In our case, we do it very much in a different way. It goes back to what Darius has talked about. We're not just talking about environmental sustainability, we're talking about global sustainable development. So the first year, for example, is organized around the 3 pillars of sustainable development. We have a core module on the economic pillar, on the social pillar, on the environmental pillar, and then the students have to do a mini project where they work together and they bring all the knowledge they have learned from these 3 core modules into that research project. Then we move to a second year where the focus of the degree is more on big themes of the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. So you will have modules around inequalities, health, food, governance, etc. And then students start specializing in areas that are of interest to them. So, but as I said, it's interdisciplinary. You also see that in the type of degree that they graduate with when they leave Warwick. So they end up with a BASc. So it's a Bachelor in Arts and Sciences, not just in Arts or in Science, which was the first one that was that we had at Warwick with this specific degree. I think what is also important to mention about it, it goes back to what Jaap just said, but also other colleagues in the previous panel. It's that it's not just about teaching about sustainability, but it's about making sure that we equip our students with the right skills to become those global citizens when they leave universities who will be able to tackle those wicked problems that we're facing today. So we're very much looking at the education for sustainable development skills, as have been mentioned before. So of course, interdisciplinary approach to questions being raised, but also very much problem-based and solution-focused pedagogical approach. We make sure that students have the right communication, intercultural skills, but also that they have these critical thinking skills, right? Because even when we're talking about the SDGs, we want to make sure that the students look at the SDGs with a critical point of view, right? There is always something that we can do better. We will have to rethink the SDGs 2030. We will continue with them or not, but we want our students to be part of that conversation. So this is very much what the degree looks like. It was launched in 2016, still going strong. And yeah, happy to tell you a bit more about it if you have specific questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so there's a question from Noreen, and then also from John in the Q&A that I'll turn to in a second. But before I do so, Darius, can I just ask you about the actual educational practice at Stellenbosch? Because before taking off on this job now, as of today, you've been for many years responsible for education, for pedagogy as a deputy vice chancellor. How have you sought in practice to embed the kinds of perspectives we've been talking about in your education at Stellenbosch?
Yeah, and thanks very much for that question. I think over the last 4 years that I was the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Learning and Teaching, we worked very hard on what we termed academic renewal within the institution. And it was about kind of looking at the relevance of our academic offerings and about the attributes and the skills and the competencies that we were developing in our graduates as an institution. So we've been working very hard to ensure that sustainability is a core agenda in our education strategy as an institution, in terms of the values that cuts across our teaching and learning, our research, but also in terms of the graduate attributes, the kind of type of graduate, the well-rounded graduate, which is this kind of critical citizen that we produce as an institution. So at Stellenbosch University, we worked to embed sustainability into our curriculum in practical ways, in interdisciplinary ways, whether it's through engineering, law, the social sciences. Our aim is to equip students with the tools to think in a systemic way, understand complexity, and to respond with purpose. So I think it speaks to broader than just the technical content that you impart on the students, but it's that kind of critical thinking, broader thinking that we want to instill, and it speaks really to the attributes that you want to have in a graduate that goes out there and that has impact on society. That's a very much part of our vision statement as a university, that everything that we do, whether it's in the teaching and learning space, whether it's in the research space, it's about developing the right kind of graduates that are going to go out there and have this kind of upliftment and socioeconomic impact on society. And that can be viewed narrowly in terms of, sustainability, but I think we view it in that kind of broad sense about the responsibility that our graduates have to change the world. So we've created spaces for students to engage with real world challenges, to work alongside communities, and to develop leadership skills grounded in ethics and equity. It's about shifting from, as I said a bit earlier, just content delivery, but really to capacity building, to building the individual, to building the graduate, to building the person that's going to go out there and make a difference in society. But we've also been working in terms of fostering collaboration between our faculties. We've heard a lot about, the importance of breaking silos, about having more interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary working within the institution. The same is true in terms of the curricula that we need to develop and the programs that we need to develop as well as alongside to develop these kind of graduates that are going to go out there and make a difference in the world. And it speaks to then strengthening the link between our curricula and our programs, between environmental issues and what I would term the kind of broader sustainability and sustainable development goals, issues around health, governance, inequality. These are not separate conversations, and these are not separate kind of learnings that we need to have within the university and within programs. They are in fact all interconnected, and universities must reflect that in this way that we teach, this kind of way of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary kind of teaching and learning, which also flows across into the research space. It's ultimately about producing the graduates that have these kind of attributes, these kind of competencies and literacies that are able to go out there and really function in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. So ultimately, we want our graduates to not just enter the workforce, but to shape a more sustainable and inclusive future. So sustainability cannot be taught in isolation. It has to be embedded in how we think, how we teach, and how we lead across every discipline, in every classroom, and in every decision that we make as an institution.
Thank you so much. That's a great segue too. So I now have 3 questions that I would like to throw at the panel, and maybe you can pick up which one. You don't have to answer all 3. Then we probably don't have time for that. But you can pick up which ones you like to respond to. So 2 questions are from the Q&A here in the chat. So the first one is about the importance of arts, culture, and heritage in communicating the challenges of the climate and nature crisis to society. I guess, and this is part of about our societal commitment, but also really about our educational programs, about how we integrate those subjects into what we do, and how important they are in addressing the climate and nature crises. We then have a question from Johan Pock, who is from a theological faculty and is asking really if anybody, and this could also be of course in the chat from other participants, but if anybody here has examples of a collaboration with religious stakeholders, with religious communities, with representatives of these communities, and to what extent that could be important in addressing the climate and nature crisis. And then I have a final question, really, which again was sort of spurred, Deresh, by your final point, and indeed what others have been making. So if it's very clear that we can't just confine our pedagogy on sustainability to a few courses somewhere in the corner of the institution, but that it really has to cut across. How can universities deliver on this at times of shrinking resources? And how do we support staff in having the capacity to engage with these issues in their teaching and indeed in their research, if you like? So 3 distinct questions. I don't know who wants to go first in terms of attempting to answer them. Otherwise, I can just pick somebody from my screen. Stephanie, do you want to go first?
I can go first. Yeah, I think I'll go for the last one to start with, if it's okay. So the pedagogy needs to cut across. I think I entirely agree with that. So at Warwick, we are doing that too in parallel with the work that's being done in GSD, where I would say, we are creating those experts in sustainability. We're also working at embedding sustainability and education for sustainable development across the entire university, which is a challenge because I think, first of all, not all disciplines or not all staff will feel that what they do links to sustainability. Although it's hard to say nowadays that something does not link to sustainability, we still need to get some people on board on that journey. So I think that is one of the challenges that we face and on which we're working on. Then there is also the challenge of the red tape that goes with institutional changes. So we had, for example, looked at could we develop a module, an optional module or a compulsory module potentially that would be a first-year optional module for all students on sustainability and the broad base sustainability. It hasn't worked out because so many degrees don't allow for optionality in first year, for example. So we are facing these type of challenges. What we've done, for example, with at Warwick to push for this, we have now sustainability as part of the university strategy. So that is helping. It's one of the 5 pillars of our university strategy. Education for sustainable development is also now a key aspect of our new education strategy. So that helps us push us for this to be embedded across the university. We have also developed what is called an ESD network with an ESD website, which is trying to educate our staff and our students about what we really mean by education for sustainable development, because there was, in fact, still quite a lack of understanding of what that meant. And so by doing this, it has helped all departments, let's say, have a better understanding of how what they do links to education for sustainable development. It's work in progress, and it needs support for staff to be able to embed this in the curriculum and embed those skills. But as Deresh was saying, I think that the co-curricular aspect of this is also key. So what he presented in the first part of this event about our sustainability challenge, for example, this is a university-wide project, has been going on now, I think we're in the 4th year. But it gives students across the university an opportunity to engage with something like that. And it gives them points and to get an award that is called the Warwick Award, and there is now a sustainability pathway. So I really think it needs to come from many directions, both within our education offering that is really curricular, but also extracurricular. And the more we do, the more we will manage to get there. But it's work in progress, and it will take time.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. In regard to the question about religious activities, I can say that Radboud University is born out of Catholic emancipation in 1923, and in that perspective, we also have Laudato Si Institute, which might be interesting for the discussion, which is an institute for integral ecology conduct and academic research, but also has attempts to cross the boundaries between academic, religious, and social boundaries. So I can put some more information into the chat, but this might be interesting in regard to that question. And in response to the third question, I can tell a little bit on how we worked as Radboud University in the past few years in regards to our pedagogic approach. So we connected much more closely to the identity formation and development questions of our own students. So as well as individuals, as professionals, to answer their role, what is my part to play? So we had a big campaign, you have a part to play, je bent nodig in Dutch. But then, of course, the question was, well, what is my part to play? And this question is proven to be a very important driving force for development within our university. And in a recent study, it also showed that there is a lot of need for this younger generation to make societal impact. So 86% of our students we interviewed, they find making this societal impact very much important, either during or after their study. So this is, I think it's a very much ground for support for the work we're doing. And we use these insights also for the broader organization. So not only education research, but also career center, business operations, and also student information. But then again, of course, I think we should also, it also expresses the need to enable lecturers to initiate this conversation about identity and impact, because we know for a fact it's not always a common practice. So it requires different pedagogical approaches. And that's why we also put in explicit attention in the professionalization of the teaching team. So not only the current, but also the upcoming, the new onboarding teachers.
Thank you. And of course, this reflects also Deresh's earlier point about how we reflect back the society in our teaching in the here and now. Deresh, do you want to?
No, I think I'll have a go at the first question, since no one's tackled that. I think the question was about the importance of I assume the humanities and the social sciences in terms of the work that we got to do. I think that it's absolutely critical. I think if you don't get the kind of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary working between what I would say the STEM kind of disciplines and the social sciences and humanities, you don't really get the ability to be able to translate it into implementable solutions out there in society. So a few years ago, I was involved as the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and we had a project in terms of reinventing the toilet. I think you may have heard about this, about seeing how you have a sustainable kind of toilet that you develop for informal settlements, informal community, settlement communities in South Africa. And there was a fantastic work that was done from an engineering and from a science point of view in terms of inventing these new waterless toilets. The challenge you had is no one consulted with the communities, right? From a community point of view, their understanding of a toilet was that if everyone has a flushing toilet, or a water-based toilet, that was seen as kind of dignity that you're giving to sanitation by having a toilet that you flush. By having these technologically advanced waterless toilets, the kind of social behaviors in these informal communities was such that it was seen as an indignity onto the community. By giving them something different, something that wasn't equitable to what prosperous people in society were utilizing for sanitation. So there's a classic example where if you don't bring in the humanities, right, and the social sciences and understanding human behavior right from the start, no matter how fantastic the solutions that we put onto the table, from a science and engineering point of view, it will probably fail. So I think that integration and that multidisciplinary working becomes ever critical. And that is why the social sciences and the humanities are integral in terms of the solutions and the translation of intellectual kind of ideas and solutions that we put out there.
Thank you. Susanna.
Yes, thank you very much. I had in mind a bit to answer to the first question and a little bit to the third one, and it goes very much in the same direction as Darren mentioned, because we had all these discussions already on STEAM in the past, so to add the A to the STEM subjects, and I think they're absolutely relevant. But I have sometimes the feeling in the debate that focusing on sustainability is nearly a super chance and a gift to bring it then also in a very pragmatic and in a very clear way together, because I think we need creative solutions for many of the issues. We need them to bounce them back to how is society reacting to it. We have to communicate, and if we take a very relatively simple technical thing, it suddenly becomes into something which we can only solve with interdisciplinary approaches. And I find that from an intellectual point of view, I find it super interesting if we look at these topics. But I think also it is really a chance for universities in a way to make study courses more linked to what is happening in society, to get them a little bit more closer to overall debates, also to answer, and Jaap mentioned it before, to the plea of many young people to do something which is relevant, which really makes a change to society. And also what we are discussing is, for example, on the STEM subject, that we have there in many of the STEM areas too few women engaged in these subjects. And but I think with looking at these subjects also in a different way again, we might reach out to bigger groups of society being interested and looking into it and enjoying it also then, and seeing their own role into that. So in a way, how much it is a pity that we have to look at sustainability because we have a mega problem in terms of climate change. On the other hand, it also offers us an opportunity to really further develop approaches, interdisciplinarity, and also to foster thinking, system thinking, and thinking in a broader context, in a broader, wider context.
Thank you so much, panel. And I have another sort of 3 questions for you, and then again you can pick it up, pick and choose which you would like to answer. But 2 of these are from the chat, and one really follows from the discussion. So first of all, so Meta is asking from Oslo about sort of resistance that might come up with if we do integrate sustainability right across the institution. Is there pushback because academics might feel that in a sense they're being asked to actually now do something else or something different to what they would normally do, either in the classroom or even in their research? So I think that's the first question. The second point comes from Jamie, because she's pointing to a kind of student-led initiative in Glasgow, and we haven't yet talked really about the opportunities for student leadership when it comes to sustainable development. It seems to me that this is a hugely important topic of great student concern. So how can we capitalize on that energy, the ideas, that enthusiasm as institutions, and how can we allow ourselves to be genuinely challenged by this? And the final question that I have is that I wanted to go again to this north-south dimension of this discussion. So we have these local contexts in which we address sustainable development and sustainability, but there's also a global debate within which these local problems need to contribute. How can we best bring the local and the global together from your perspectives, from your experiences? So again, I leave it to you to pick and choose. And yeah, over to you.
Yes, I think I can contribute from the first question, because really really aligns to the process we have gone through with this integration into our curricula. Because the question was, is there anything that lecturers or students have to do different to integrate sustainability? And well, our finding that in essence, it's not really that case. So what happened is that we received a Comenius grant, a national grant for educational innovation, and from that money, a team of colleagues was able to get into dialogues with students as well as lecturers for all our 38 bachelor programs. So it was a very time-consuming step, but the process has proven to be very important in our process, because these dialogues all resulted in the broader notion that there is actually a natural connection with every bachelor for sustainability and the SDGs. But what was clear is that this natural connection often was not made explicit by lecturers, not in the lecture halls or in adjacent communication. So I think that the most valuable lesson from all this is that we have to make explicit what is already there. So this connection, which is natural, we need to make it explicit, and that is, I think, one of the main things we did in the past few years. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna add to that. I entirely agree. I think in our case, yes, there is resistance, but very often due to this lack of understanding of this natural connection, as you just said, yeah, right. So I think we really need to have dialogues with the member of staff who still believe that asking to invest in sustainability means talking about solar panels and EVs, for example. Right? It is much more than that, but for some reason, it's still interpreted as that by too many people. So as soon as you start having the conversation with these potential colleagues that might show some resistance, they understand that in fact they are already doing what we're asking them to do. They're just potentially not using the words to, link it to the sustainability agenda. So this is work that is ongoing. It's about showing that we're not asking for major changes. We're just potentially asking for them to put this within their sustainability context and link it to the students, so the students also see that link. The other thing I was going to answer was the points you asked about the student-led initiatives. Because at Warwick, we have very, very passionate students. I suppose, that's the case for the majority of the universities nowadays, but they are very keen on sustainability and have been for a while. And it was, I think, in 2018, 2019, they pushed together with members of staff from the GSD department, but also some other departments, for the university to declare a climate emergency. And this was really coming from students and staff. So it was this passion for sustainability and climate change and fighting, to make a difference that led to the university making that commitment, which then led to, us developing sustainability strategy and then going on that journey. And for me, now that I'm in this role as academic director and I lead on sustainability strategy, I also chair the University Sustainability Committee, and it has a set of action groups also that focus on specific aspects of a sustainability strategy. But in each of those action groups and on my sustainability committee, we have student representation, because the students are the voices, the new voices of the future, right? And they are so passionate, they have so many ideas, they are so creative, that we would be missing out on a huge resource if we wouldn't include them in our conversations. So this is how we're trying to address this within our university. We also work very closely with the Students' Union, for example, and have regular meetings with them, because we should be working together in sustainability. We have the same objective and same goals.
Can I just very quickly interject though? So what do you do when students challenge the university to do something, I don't know, something much more radical than the university is doing?
We have conversations. Then we check what is possible and we bring it up to the university executive board. That's how we do. We just make sure that we create that space for them to be able to raise it. We try to understand where they're coming from, see what is possible, and then have the right conversation with the right relevant people who can make those decisions. And sometimes it will lead to change. Like you will have, as I said, with the climate emergency being declared by the university in 2019. Sometimes it needs further conversation, it needs some compromise, but they have a voice, and we make sure that they have that voice.
Thank you. Diresh, do you want to come in?
I think on the first point, the first question, I think it's always going to be challenging in the academic environment. Academics by nature are very set in their ways in terms of the content that they deliver in the kind of offerings. And I think it's about changing a mindset of thinking in an unsiloed or breaking the silos kind of way. And I think that is critical in terms of getting that shift to occur. That it isn't just about the technical content. The reality is our graduates, when they go out there, utilize a small percentage of the technical content that we put into their curricula and into their programs. It's actually the kind of other aspects, the kind of competencies, skills, and attributes that we develop within them that are the most utilized out there in the real world. And so I think it's that kind of mindset shift that we need to get into the kind of academic, or the faculty, I should say. It's been something that we've been trying to do over the last few years in terms of our large kind of academic renewal game changer at Stellenbosch University. And it's starting to pay some dividends in terms of that kind of shift we're starting to see in terms of the way academics are thinking around these kind of issues, and about how we need to do things in a far more integrated fashion, especially when it comes to issues around sustainability. Students are passionate. I think the point around student societies, we have a number of student societies at Stellenbosch University. A few of these societies are involved in discussions and issues around sustainability. they really drive these kind of initiatives. They ask the tough questions of the university leadership when we start looking at issues around holistic sustainability, questions around should it actually start with the university itself in terms of the way we start to look at sustainability within the institution, environmental sustainability, and so forth. So, it's important, and it's important that we encourage that. Important that we encourage that kind of way of thinking amongst our students, and to give them that opportunity to be able to participate in these kind of societies while at the university. It is very much part of the learning journey that our students take while at university, and it should be something that we ensure that they actively participate and engage in. So yeah, I think that's just my thought on that.
Thank you. And Susanne?
Yes, I was thinking also about the first question, and I have to say my times at being every day in a university and working there are 20 years ago. So from therefore, I'm a little bit incompetent on all the three questions, but I think the question of resistance is much broader and goes beyond the university. It goes more into the question, how do we see higher education and which role does it play in society, and how much can we define it, let's say, in a classical way, how we did it 20, 30, 50 years ago, and how much has it really changed? And what came into my mind is that there are different aspects coming into it. It is the content, it is the structure of subjects, how much do we have classical subjects or more interdisciplinary approaches like we look at in sustainability, but also how do pathways in higher education look like? We see more and more that it is not the classical pattern anymore, finishing school, then going to higher education, then going to a job. No, we are discussing micro-credentials, we are discussing all different forms of, in a more flexible way, to have higher education studies, which also then automatically has a repercussion on the type of students we have and the demand students have if they are already having work experience, if they have already a broader view there. So I think it is probably in a way we are in a phase where higher education is also a bit changing constantly, maybe more. I can't judge if it is more faster than in before or not, but it's changing, and that of course leads to a lot of questions which in the end of the day acquire discussion, reflection, seeing how we go, and also having these patterns in mind. What does society need? What does company need? What is the ambition of the students? How can higher education also adapt to its role and in its ambition?
Right, thank you. I think we've had a really wide-ranging debate. I want to thank our panelists in this panel, but also in our previous panel, and all the speakers really for their fantastic contributions. So I really just want to take a few moments to really recognize that maybe to my mind, that the key thing that's been in my mind as we've had this discussion is that, how different this discussion has felt from so often when we are being accused of being these ivory towers. I think that we didn't even have to make the point that we need to be part of society, because this has all been about how we contribute, how we engage with society, and the massive challenges that we all see before us. And I think that I think the key messages to me for policymakers, for society, for ourselves, is how we are right in that space of really taking that responsibility very, very seriously. The second point, and I want to bring that back, is that we have reflected, especially in the first panel, really on the change in geopolitics, also when it comes to the United States and its expectation of the United States government around climate change, and questions around equity. And I think that we have had affirmations really about our own values and about the importance of being led and guided by science. And I think Susanne and it's really important to also look to our policymakers, both at a European level but also at a national level, that they stand with us on this, because I think we really do need to work together. And I also note, of course, also in the context of South Africa, that there is a really important urgency around a global community of response in terms of the values that we stand for and that bring us together, and that we also work with everybody, irrespective of which country they come from, to address these issues and concerns. there is then, of course, this global dimension, and therefore, Susanne, again, we discussed this a little bit, but I think universities are global in their very nature, and I think Deresh's presence here and his contributions reflect, I think, this, and therefore this jewel in the crown of Erasmus Plus that has this global dimension is something we really support very explicitly, and we will do everything in our power in terms of us as stakeholders and as a community to really make sure that this is in the mind of our policymakers, particularly at this important time, that we strengthen that dimension, and also it's how it can better engage with other parts of the union's programs. We've heard an important concern around the just and fair transition. So again, this panel has reiterated in different perspective the arguments made in the first panel about the need for a holistic approach, but I think the emphasis on a just transition, I think this is something that I think will resonate in Europe, but of course it has particular resonance in other parts of the world. And again, it re-emphasizes how much we have to learn from each other and constantly need to keep that dialogue, whether it's around teaching or research or societal engagement together. And that is, of course, the thing that really ultimately brings this paper and these contributions together, which is that this is that our engagement with sustainable development, with sustainability, and with addressing the climate and nature crises, that this is something that goes right across of all of our missions. So with that, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the work that has inspired your contributions here. And I wish you a wonderful day, but we will stay in contact, and because this is an important work that is by no means finished, but we will continue. And but for now, thank you so much for this fantastic discussion, and thank you so much to all the participants in the chat as well. Thank you.